So I just have to watch the participant. People are joining late, and we'll let them in as we get started here. So again, welcome. I'm Darren Heyland, and I'm a professor of medicine at Queen's University. I'm a critical care doctor. And of course, this has been my place where I've worked for many years, where patients are super sick and we're making decisions about using or not using life-sustaining technologies. And so that's a very stressful time, not just for me as a doctor, but you can imagine as a patient, as a family member, the difficulties in sorting out what might be best for people. It had been my lived experience as an ICU doctor that, substitute decision makers who are requested to come in and make decisions on behalf of loved ones who are very sick, that is a very stressful time for them. Um, Oftentimes we hear things like, "Oh, I don't know what my loved one would have wanted. We didn't talk about it." And consequently, they have a lot of negative experiences with that role of substitute decision making. One of the biggest challenges is because, and I'll make this point again, because a lot of the discussions and documents that are recorded are in the context of end of life care, that people have difficulty with that transition of, well, is this end of life care or is this serious illness? Is this really the event that will take my loved one's life? And so consequently, we're trying to address that and do things a little bit differently moving forward. And I've been a big advocate myself of this concept of thinking ahead and planning ahead for your medical care, because that can reduce some of the stress that we've been talking about. However, I realize that it's not just medical care that Canadians don't really engage in thinking ahead and planning ahead. There's legal documents that are involved in thinking ahead and planning ahead that don't get done. There's financial aspects. And so this opportunity in April 16th, is National Advanced Care Planning Day. Benjamin Franklin said there's nothing that could be as certain as death and taxes. And so we saw this as an opportunity to gather with our colleagues from the legal, from the financial planning perspective, and present to you a webinar on how we can optimally prepare for the future in case something untoward happens to us. Now is the time, when the sun is shining proverbially, to fix the leaky roof. And so while we're well, now is the time to engage in thinking ahead and planning ahead. So I'm grateful to have a couple of colleagues with me. After I do my ditty on the medical side of thinking ahead and planning ahead, I'm going to turn the talking stick over to Carolyn Knight from Viner Kennedy, Frederick Allen, and Tobias, a local legal firm here in Kingston. And following her presentation, Anthony Stallone from Investment Planning Council. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So let me jump into this and acknowledge that, oh my gosh, COVID has given us a real need to think ahead and plan ahead for lest us or one of our loved ones get sick with COVID. And maybe some of you have wrestled with this, what would happen to me if I got sick, and what kind of treatments would I get, and what kind of treatments might be right for me, and how will I fare? Who will make decisions for me if I'm so sick that I can't speak? These are real questions, and maybe you have them for yourself, or maybe you're worried about an older family member, an older loved one. And so these are the things that we're going to talk about today as we move forward in the presentation. There's lots of research literature to suggest that if you don't think ahead or plan ahead for your medical care, you're likely to get the wrong care. And I'll go through some of that detail in a few slides from now. But more commonly than not, that means you're undergoing a more intensified experience than you really would have wanted, which can contribute to pain and suffering. Not just the patient, but the family member who's a witness to this, and as I mentioned earlier, is brought into that decision making where they experience a lot of stress and a lot of suffering because they're ill prepared for that role. Um, Not only do they have experience, stress in the acute phase, but in many months to follow as they live with that experience of having had to participate in that serious illness decision making. I remember an anecdote of a woman who I was called down to the emergency room, and we had to make a quick decision on, do we resuscitate and revive her husband who was older and had significant health problems, or do we just focus on comfort measures only? And in that heat of the moment, we made a quick decision to just focus on comfort measures, and and the man passed away. 6 months later, uh, the poor woman calls me and says, "Dr. Heyland, this is so and so. Do you remember me? You cared for my husband. Did we make the right decision?" So she's living with the trauma of that experience, of that in the moment decision making, feeling ill prepared, and wondering, living with that sense of regret. Here's another anecdote that illustrates um, the burden that a lot of people carry from that decision making encounter. This is I was writing in the Whig Standard about this problem several years ago, and a lady wrote me a letter, and she said a lot more than I'm showing you here on the slide, but basically saying that, my husband died recently in KGH. He was 78. I read your article. I am one of those that is still suffering from having to see loved ones having to endure the pain of mechanical ventilation when he should have been offered palliative care. Someone in emergency should have known that we needed this based on the medical evidence and his history of many admissions in the past years. And so I I take two things away from this anecdote. Again, number one, it's a year later after the death of a loved one, and a substitute decision maker or a witness to that decision making encounter is still suffering. And number two, there's implied here a faith in the healthcare system that the healthcare system should know better or should have known what the right thing to do is. And I'm not trying to besmirch our wonderful publicly funded healthcare system, but you can imagine it's a big system with lots of players and there's lots of room for error. And so one of my messages today is to empower you to understand that space that you're going to go into when you get sick, and give you the tools to advocate for self, or empower your substitute decision maker to advocate for you so that you get the medical care that's right for you. Now, I've done enough research with lay people to know what the barriers to doing this. Why don't people think ahead and plan ahead for their medical care? And I'd like to address some of those in case some of you listening are thinking to yourself, well, I don't really need to invest much time or energy into this because my family know me and they'll be with me and they'll do right by me and they'll know what's best for me. Because you're right, we will have to turn to that family member, legally named your substitute decision maker or your power of attorney. And Carolyn will speak more about that later. But we do have to use them to make life and death decisions for you. But I don't care how loving and how close and how connected you are as a family. If you've never explicitly talked about your wishes for aggressive treatments when seriously ill, they'll struggle to know what the right answer is because the consequences are serious, right? They're life and death. And I can't tell you how many times as a critical care doctor, when a family member says, "Oh, I don't know what they would have wanted because we never talked about it," the stress is palpable. Conversely, I can tell you that when someone can reach into their memory banks and say something like, Mom and I discussed this, and she always said that when it came her time, this is what she would have wanted. Oh, that is so helpful to alleviate that stress. Yes, it's still a difficult decision, but when the family members have talked about it in detail, it goes so much better, for them. Now, there's others of you that might say, well, you don't know my family. This is a very, difficult situation here. I've got a lot of conflict and dysfunction in my family. And so I don't want to talk to them about it. Well, if you think that you have a dysfunctional family with conflict before you get sick or before you die, You just need to talk to Carolyn and others, litigation lawyers who are riddled with stories of conflict, trying to resolve this matter when now the patient is incapacitated or has passed on. And so, would have been so much better if we could have had these difficult conversations pre-incapacitation or pre-death. And if you need help from other coaches or social workers or even doctors to navigate those conversations, engage with them and get that help. Better to have the conversation while you're alive and not when you're incapacitated or dead. Other barriers to engaging in this is you think, well, if this is important, my doctor will bring it up. Yeah, you're right. They should, but they don't. And let me tell you why and what the consequence of that is. We surveyed hundreds of patients in scores of hospitals around Canada, and we spent an hour talking to them, understanding them, getting a sense of who they were, their values, and their informed treatment preferences. We asked them, had they talked to the doctor about their wishes? Had they had a conversation about their prognosis? And you can see only a third of the people said yes to, I've had a conversation, and only 20% say, yes, my doctors helped me understand how sick I am, what my prognosis is. Then we went to the medical record and we looked at their orders for the use or non-use of life-sustaining treatments. And based on what the person tells us and what's on the hospital record, it only agreed 1 in 3 times. So you have a 1 in 3 chance of getting the care that's right for you in our healthcare system today. Those are terrible odds. We then turned to the doctors and said, tell us why you're not talking to your patients about these important issues that determine, whether they go to the ICU or not, whether they get resuscitated or not. And I'm showing you a long list of barriers, potential reasons why doctors don't talk to patients or their family members about this matter. And the top most important barriers confessed by these doctors and nurses working in acute care hospitals around Canada where, the family or the patient, they're just not quite there. They're not quite ready to discuss this. They don't understand the nature of this conversation. They don't understand or accept their disease or their prognosis. And so, you know what? I just don't have the time or energy, emotional energy to engage with these patients. And I'm hoping they'll get better and they'll be discharged and it'll be somebody else's problem. So that is, I think, an accurate description of what happens in acute care today in Canada. So if you want to have, a better conversation about what's right for you, you're going to have to push forward and manage that. And I'll give you some tools on how to do that. One of the other big barriers to doing advanced medical care planning is this notion that, I've been to the lawyer, I filled out those forms, I'm done. I don't have to lean into this space anymore. And I just, with all respect to Carolyn and her profession, I want to just have you think about the sensibility of doing health planning with a lawyer. It's no more sensible than me going into a courtroom and litigating somebody on this, that, or a matter of law. And so we're working with lawyers to try and remove them from doing the health planning. They play an important role, and Carolyn will speak to that in terms of the naming and capacitating of substitute decision makers. But let's not have them do the health planning, but rather, go to PlanWell Guide, which is a novel tool that I'll introduce you to that will serve to capacitate both yourself and your substitute decision maker when it comes to doing health planning. One of the most important messages that I want to communicate today that makes it difficult to interpret living wills or instructions in powers of attorney or other documents that you may want to pre-specify your wishes for end of life care is that at the point where I, as an ICU doctor, have to make a decision to use life supports, to put you on breathing machines or not, it is not clear whether this is your end of life experience. It is a myth that we can accurately diagnose dying, or at least at the point where I need to make decisions about the use or non-use of life-sustaining treatments. And so decisions made or documents filled out under conditions of certainty, when I am dying, this is what I want or this is what I don't want, are not helpful. in fact, are part of the problem and part of the problem that leads to medical error in this space of making decisions about using life sustaining treatments. Because the doctor then has to translate something that was recorded in writing or documented or said to somebody, oh, when I'm dying, I don't want this. Well, this isn't his, I don't know if this is his dying episode. He could die, but he also could recover. And so, how do we apply this? And so, there's that translational step made in the moment that results in error sometimes, not always, no, but sometimes. And so that's why we're trying to change the language away from end of life to more serious illness planning, as you noted on the title of this presentation. Another reason we're doing that is because, there's this avoidance of talking about death and dying, even amongst our older citizens. And so if we pivot a little bit and say, okay, we don't have to talk about death and dying, but let's talk about serious illness because during this pandemic that any of us could get seriously ill from COVID. Or regardless of COVID, before COVID and after COVID, there'll always be medical complications like severe heart attacks or strokes, or just crossing the street at the wrong time and getting hit by a car that could leave you incapacitated and unable to think and speak for yourself. And so, who's going to make decisions for you, and what have you done to capacitate them, that loved one, so that they have a better experience? So, we're pivoting now, right? We're not talking about end of life care. We're talking about serious illness. And we're trying to help you as lay people understand the decisions that will need to be made for you, so that you can say the kinds of things that will be helpful to people like me, and we make the right decision for you. So that's what this is all about from my point of view. So we get started in that conversation, and I've had this conversation thousands of times with people, and we ask things about, well, what do you want when you're seriously ill? And frequently still get that quizzical look. Well, like, doctor, why are you asking me this question? Why wouldn't you just keep me comfortable? Because again, what they hear and what they think when we do this kind of planning is that, well, they think I'm still asking about what treatments they want when they're dying. And that is not the case. I stress that again. We're talking about serious illness and not terminal illness. Let me, use this slide to highlight the differences. You know, terminal or end of life care is under conditions of certainty. I am dying. This is what I want, and this is what I don't want. And for people, say, with advanced cancer or other degenerative diseases where they know they're on a trajectory towards death, that is still relevant, but it's not done with a lawyer. It's done with a healthcare professional. It's done with someone that knows you, and you plot out your final end of life journey. And you fill out healthcare system forms, not legal forms, to accomplish that. Now, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about serious illness. I'm talking about you and I being well today, but tomorrow or later this afternoon, heaven forbid. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be morbid, but to the extent that we can embrace the reality of the future, that we could have a serious illness, we think ahead, we plan ahead, we engage in it, then we'll be better prepared and the experience will go better for us. So serious illness is where death is not a certainty, but it's a probability. But there's a probability that you could recover, and we're trying to figure out what is right for you. And more likely than not, you will be incapacitated. And so that responsibility of engaging with the doctors will fall onto somebody else. And so the whole point is to capacitate them to be able to speak for you on your behalf. So moving back into this conversation, then I want to share one other repeated conversation I have with people when we get into what treatments might be right for you. I hear this frequently, and I'm sure some of you are thinking this right now. Well, that depends on what happens to me or how I turn out. If I turn out well, I'd want you to do everything possible to keep me alive. But if I'm going to turn out poorly, I'd want you just to focus on comfort measures and let me go. And I'm sorry, but I don't have a crystal ball. And I don't know at the point where I have to make decisions about ICU or resuscitation or breathing machines. I don't know exactly how you will turn out. I may be able to give you some sense of your prognosis or the probabilities of certain outcomes, but I won't have certainty at that point. And so for you to say, well, it depends on how I turn out, isn't actually going to be helpful. Let me give you an illustration that I think will resonate with you, or you'll have some understanding of what I'm trying to say. And that is the weather analogy, because I'm sure most of you, when you get up in the morning, you check the weather report, radio, on your phone, TV, whatever, and you hear the weatherman say things like, well, there's a 60% probability of rain, chance of major thunder showers. So you hear that expression in probabilistic terms, and you still have to make decisions. You still have to say, well, okay, well, what am I going to do today? Am I going to stay in because it might rain? Or am I going to go out? Do I take an umbrella? Do I wear a raincoat? You're still moving forward. You're still making decisions, not sure if it's going to rain or not. All right. Maybe that's not a great example. It's the best one I can come up with, but it tries to illustrate the point that we're here trying to figure out what a plan might look like under conditions of uncertainty. Perhaps more to the point, though, I'm not actually asking you to make any decisions in advance when we do advanced serious illness planning, but rather I'm asking you to learn about when the decision gets made, what that looks like, and what will be your role or the substitute decision maker's role in that decision making encounter. So I use this slide to communicate what we call shared medical decision making, that when you're sick, the doctor will want to talk to, well, the doctor first will do an assessment and try and figure out what the problem is. And then we'll try and share with you the possible treatment options and the risks and benefits and possible outcomes of those treatment decisions. And then we'll try and elicit from you your values and preferences. And then in that collaborative conversation, make a decision about what might be right for you. Okay, so that's what medical decision making in serious illness looks like. Again, you can imagine if you're not prepared or you don't really know how to express yourself well, it'll be a struggle. We may get a wrong medical decision. Or if your substitute decision maker is not adequately prepared. So the whole goal here is to try and adequately prepare people to be able to express their authentic values and their informed treatment preferences. So that combined with the doctor's input, at that point when you're seriously ill, you can make the medical decision that's right for you. So let's talk a little bit about values. Again, values and preferences being super important then in that decisional space. You need to be able to articulate them in a way a doctor can utilize them. By values, we mean things that are really important to you, your life philosophies, but expressed in this context of serious illness, end of life care. And so here's some examples of the kinds of things that you might say that might be important to a doctor to hear that will help them, help you get the medical treatments that are right for you. I want to live as long as possible. So I might interpret that then, well, then machines and ICU care is right for you. We should carry on. Or I want to avoid the use of machines. I prefer, if my number comes up, a natural death, focus on dignity and comfort. Well, then I might infer that going to the ICU and machines are not right for you. And so that's how it goes. But the problem with the way we do this in medicine right now is that you as a layperson don't always see the conflict or the trade-off between these competing value statements. So for example, you may have a patient who says, I want you to keep me maximally comfortable and I want you to keep me alive as long as possible. Well, to keep you alive as long as possible, I'd have to use machines, and that will have a negative effect on your comfort and on your experience. So which is it? You can't have both. Similarly, there's a real trade-off between quantity of life and quality of life. And let me just use an illustration of how, most of us would like to have a high quality of life for as long as possible and then, sort of fall off the end at the end of our lives. But the reality is, for many Canadians, the longer we live, the greater the reduction in the quality of life and our functional capacity as we age and approach the end of our lives. And regrettably, there are some that even cross that threshold and end up in a health state that we call, something worse than death. And I imagine many of you can think of a friend or a family member or imagine for yourself what that kind of health state worse than death would look like. And that's actually really important for us to know as doctors. And there's a place on PlanWell Guide that I'll explain to you in a minute where you can record that. But the point being that the longer we prolong your life, that comes at the expense of quality and function. And I'll just share an anecdote of an encounter I had where my patient was an older woman who had pneumonia, on life supports, organs starting to fail. I was really concerned about her survivability. Met with the daughter, sat knee to knee, explained this all, trying to elicit from the daughter, what the values statement would be that would help us to know what the go forward plan was with this woman. What do we continue to hope for at all, press on at all costs to keep her alive, or do we change our goals and remove the machines and let nature take its course? And so again, these are life and death decisions. And the daughter says to me, well, my mom's a fighter. She'd want every chance to survive. And so if I would have ended the conversation there, I would have gone away and I would have prescribed maximal treatments to keep her alive at all costs, including resuscitation. But the other competing objective here is that the longer I do that, the more I do that, the more likely it is that if she survives, there'll be a reduced functional capacity, a reduced quality of life. And so I had to explore with that daughter her mom's quality of life and whether she'd be accepting any further reductions in that quality of life. And turns out that her mom was barely managing independently and would think it be worse than death to have to be institutionalized. And so in the end, that conversation, and you can see the trade-off between quality and quantity, but that conversation where we brought both of those aspects up led to a better decision for her mom. Her mom passed away peacefully in the ensuing days. And so the way we elicit values has to make those competing or conflicting values very explicit. And so in Plan Well Guide, we ask that question like this, where you have a scale 1 to 7. Tell me the kind of person you are. Are you someone, if you were to get seriously ill today, would want treatments to focus on keeping you alive at all costs or maintaining quality of your remaining days? And you can see you got to pick one or the other. Oh yeah, you can pick 4, you can go right in the middle, but I'll show you how that's still helpful to us. In a similar way, we ask that question about your willingness to accept machines. Are you the kind of person that's okay with that, or are you the kind of person that if your number comes up and you become seriously ill, that you just want to be kept comfortable? And so you tell us. And again, one of the innovations that we've developed then is taking these value scales and making them into a grid where the one scale is the X and the other scale is the Y axis. We look at your responses, and that indicates a cell in this grid. And in that cell might be the medical treatment that's right for you. Even if you are a 4 and a 4, you can see it's still indicative of a medical treatment that might be right for you. And I stress that word might just because, this is done in I guess a naive state where you don't really know the difference between comfort care or medical care or the benefits and risks of CPR. And so a big part of Plan Well Guide is to explain that all to you. We make a big mistake in medicine by treating you, and I say this respectfully, but you are not an informed and autonomous agent as much as you think you'd like to be. And so when you come in sick with your heart attack and the doctor says to you, if your heart stops, what do you want us to do? Is that really the best language? Because you don't really understand what, reviving or resuscitating the heart is. And I know that because I've studied this extensively, and I know that most lay people get their ideation about what CPR is like from TV, where there's a lot of misinformation, as you can imagine. And when we've surveyed hundreds of lay people in hospital who have a CPR on their order on their chart, they don't know anything about it or what the possible risks or side effects might be. And so a big part of what we try and do in preparing you for future medical decision making is we present you a decision aid where you're explained what intensive care means. What are the benefits? What are the possible risks? What are the possible outcomes? Might this be right for you? And we do the same for medical care, and we do the same for comfort care. And we have a 7-minute CPR video that enables you visually to see what that looks like, what the possible outcomes are, what the possible risks. Might that be right for you? And so it informs you. So when the doctor says, when your heart stops and what might you want? Well, now you're an informed consumer and you can express an informed treatment preference. So what I've said so far about medical decision making is a bit of a warning that there's lots of problems, lots of confusion, even lots of medical error in this space. And whilst, I can do my best to educate healthcare professionals and work at a system level, I've chosen to spend my time trying to empower and capacitate you as lay people to understand this decision space and to try and create a tool that will enable you to navigate that better. And that's what led me to create Plan Well Guide, which is a free online advanced serious illness planning tool. When you get into it, there's some tabs here that help you understand what this is all about, what this website is all about, how to use this site. Serious illness decision making, that conversation we had about the difference between terminal end of life care, serious illness care, that's all explicated there. Thinking about your values, so those value scales. There's more than just the two I showed you, but it's all in that section of the website. And then this section here, different types of care, is really the part where we explicate the difference between ICU medicine, just medical care on the floor, and comfort care, so that you understand if you sign up for one, what you're giving up or what you're getting. And that's where you find that video decision aid on cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So now once informed and once you know what your authentic values are, you log in, you make a plan, and the output of that planning process is what we call the Dear Doctor letter. And basically it says, Dear Doctor, I went to Plan Well Guide. I know the difference between end of life care and serious illness planning, and I've gone through this planning process, and here are my values, and here are my informed treatment preferences. And there's actually a third page where you have options to record that health state worse than death. You also have a place to record any outstanding questions that you might have, so that when you go to the doctor, basically you have a script to follow, right? You're able to show and tell what your values, what your preferences are, and here's your issues or questions that you have that you want to discuss with that person in the moment. And oh, by the way, this also becomes the script for your substitute decision maker who may be called up to act on your behalf with that doctor. So it's recorded. They know how to best represent you in those end of life decisions. Some of you may feel that, this is too complex stuff, these terms, ICU, resuscitation, and you may want some help. And so there is a tab on the website where a chat bot, if you have a quick question, or there are healthcare planners, healthcare advocates, healthcare navigators that can spend some time with you to help you sort that out. That is a fee for service. Everything else on the website is free. Some of you may say, yeah, I'm not really interested in doing all this online. And so there is a pamphlet available. You'd have to go onto the website under the resource page and download and print a multi-page pamphlet where the last 4 pages are the same as the Dear Doctor letter. So the first so many pages are the content that I just reviewed that's on the website in an abbreviated version. And then again, you have the last 4 pages that are available to you on the website. So the idea here, and we're working with primary care doctors to try and get them to prescribe to you that you go off and do your serious illness planning, recognizing that they don't have the time, some of them don't have the interest to have that comprehensive planning conversation with you. And so if they could just nudge you to go off to the website, or independent of your family doctor, now that you know about it, you can go off and do the planning yourself. You get your Dear Doctor letter, you discuss it with your family, and ultimately then that becomes your talking points with a doctor in the future to get the medical care that's right for you. That might be an ER doc that you've never met before. It might be an ICU doc that you've never met before, but you at least know what to say, and then you'll get the medical care that's right for you. Now, we also are trying to partner with other planning professionals, like lawyers, like financial planners, because they're sitting knee to knee with their clients, trying to help them think ahead and plan ahead from a holistic point of view. And so sliding in that conversation about, hey, you should do your medical planning and go to PlanWell Guide, that's part of what we're trying to do. That's why we're collaborating with lawyers and financial planners and other planning professionals in trying to create a public awareness of PlanWell Guide. In closing, I just want to share another anecdote of a woman who, her and her husband went through PlanWell Guide, got their Dear Doctor letter, got their goals of care in place, had talked to their family. And then unfortunately, a few months later, the husband collapsed, fell, banged his head super hard, sustained a life-threatening head injury, was put on life supports and transferred to a major center to undergo ongoing care. After a few days of evaluating him, the doctor sat knee to knee with the woman and said, "There's no good outcome here. He's got significant brain injury. What do you want us to do?" And in that scenario, that woman remembered hearing the voice of her husband, because they'd been through PlanWell Guide. They talked to this. The whole family, all the children, understood what the man's wishes would be. And so they made that difficult decision of letting him go. But there was some peace and satisfaction in knowing that they were honoring his wishes in letting him go. And she gave a strong endorsement for this kind of thing. You never know when serious illness would strike. And so it's just one of those things where you fix the roof when sun's shining, not when it's raining. And so, I hope and pray that you don't have serious illness and you don't have COVID pneumonia, but by investing some time and energy into getting these medical plans in place, it'll go better for you. You can enjoy a greater peace of mind, and you can know that you've given a gift to your family or to your substitute decision maker, because they'll know, how to best interact with the doctors in the future when you do get seriously ill. So my invitation is to engage in PlanWell Guide, to get this planning done for yourselves, and to help me get the word out, disseminate awareness, share it with your friends and family. If you're the kind of person that really loves this kind of work and is willing to give me feedback on some of the tools, we're always trying to improve our tools and our content. Send me an email. I'll be happy to engage with you. If you're the kind of person on social media, engage with our social media and post and help us promote the word and get the word out. I'd greatly appreciate it. So thank you for your time and listening to me today. I hope what I have said has been valuable to you. I'm going to turn the time now over to Carolyn to speak more about the legal aspects of planning. And then again, following Carolyn will be Anthony about the financial aspects of serious illness planning. And then we'll come off screen. We'll come off our microphones, and people feel free to ask questions. Again, if you have questions and you're worried about forgetting them, throw them in the chat. We'll address them at the end of the presentation. Thank you, everybody. Carolyn, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Darren has advised, I'm an estate planning lawyer at Viner Kennedy, downtown Kingston. I've been doing this for about 28 years. Time flies when you're having fun. I have in a little over 10 minutes to summarize powers of attorneys, estate planning, probate, and wills, which normally I can do this in a couple of hours. So I'm going to just do very little highlights. I absolutely would be happy to talk about any specific issue you might have. If you want to call, I'll give you a few minutes free on the phone. Don't feel like there's going to be a bill. So if you do have questions, don't hesitate to give me a shout. The first thing I want to talk about are the powers of attorneys. And there are two types, as you may or may not know. There is one that deals with personal care, and there's one that deals with financing. The personal care one comes into play specifically with the PlanWell Guide. We try not to be doctors when we're lawyers. We don't want to be making these decisions. And I don't think it's fair to just simply allow the person you're going to name to make these decisions without some guidance. And I think by incorporating reference to that Dear Doctor letter in the power of attorney, at least the serious illness component of that possible future can be addressed. And the people you name then have some source to go to and feel better when they make these decisions. The personal care power of attorney is not just there to deal with serious illness and end of life decision. You also have to understand that you're giving someone the power to determine where you live, how you're clothed, how you're fed, day-to-day healthcare decisions, and serious illness and end of life. So it's a very expansive power you are giving somebody. And when we create these documents, we create them in a way that they are only triggered if you can't make decisions. So as long as you are capable of making your own decisions, these would not trigger. Then who are we going to pick to make these decisions? If I have a client that wants to pick their 4 children, that's going to be a problem. Having all 4 kids agree on every single issue is going to end up having periods of time where things there's stalemates, and then nothing gets done. And then what you really want done isn't followed. We talk about maybe having consecutive people. If you've got four kids, we list them in order. Sometimes we don't want even your own family if you're concerned that they won't follow your wishes. Sometimes we have a family member who would keep you alive in any state, even if that's not what you wanted, because they could never let you go. That's not the person you're going to want to name to make medical decisions for you, because at the end of the day, they won't do what you want. So the critical piece is picking someone that will do what you want. The other power of attorney, if I can move on, is the financial. You are giving someone the power to be you. A financial power of attorney, once triggered, gives someone the power to buy, sell, mortgage, contract, do everything in your name. Be very careful when you pick this person. They don't have to be an expert at finances. The 2 critical pieces when I advise, when people ask me who should I pick, 1, someone that's very trustworthy, and 2, someone who is wise enough to get the expertise involved when needed. So if they're smart enough to know, let's call the financial person, let's call the accountant, let's call the lawyer, and they're prepared to work with the professionals, they will typically do a much better job than someone who says, I can just do it all myself, and then not everything is being covered. Same thing in terms of if you pick multiple parties as financial powers of attorneys. If we have someone who is here and a child, another kid who's in Toronto, and you pick them both, every single check has to be signed by both. That could be very difficult if you were incompetent for a long period of time and someone had to pay your bills and manage your finances with a sibling out of the area. So sometimes it's the local person that's the best for the job. The next thing I want to quickly discuss is estate planning, wills. I can tell you when people come in, a lot of their initial concern is probate fees. We have to avoid probate. I strongly recommend you don't make decisions purely to save probate. There may be things we can do to save probate, but at the end of the day, that's not the governing thing that we look at. The critical pieces in drafting a will is that your estate goes where you want it to go. As little money goes to the government as possible, as little money goes to the lawyers as possible. So we're creating a document that someone is not going to contest. We're creating a document that saves tax if we can, and if we can save probate fees. So in doing that, we look at all the different things that should be put in a will. And the first thing I want to talk about is choosing the right executor, just like choosing the right power of attorney. You're picking someone who will make sure that the wishes you want in the will be followed. And again, if you pick multiple parties, if they disagree, what ends up happening is a judge will make a decision for them. Having a judge make a decision for them means money's going out to lawyers. So I'm going back to my premise at the beginning. We want to avoid as much money going to lawyers. So we want to avoid conflicts within the estate plan as much as possible. So creating executors who will be able to deal with conflicts, follow the terms of the will, that is really important to us. Also, where they live. If you have an executor who's out of province, they may have to post bonds. That adds cost to the estate. I have many clients who the only children they have all live in the US. Well, if that's who they want to pick, that's who they pick. But there are going to be extra costs, so they just have to be made aware of that. In wills, we also have to create, in many situations, trusts because we have minors. If you don't have a proper trust in a will and a minor inherits, it goes to the public guardian and trustee in Toronto, and they manage the money for them. And at 18, they get a check. So it's really important that proper trusts are created in wills. Also, if you have disabled beneficiaries who are on Ontario disability, not properly creating a Henson trust in a will could result in the beneficiary being cut off of ODSP, which may not be a big deal if you're leaving them a lot of money, but it may be a big deal in terms of benefits. They would be cut off of all the benefits for dental prescription, and some disabled beneficiaries desperately need large value prescriptions. In terms of those of you that are younger and have children, picking who the guardians are, a lot of young couples will come in and say, well, we waited and waited because we could never agree on who the guardian was. I can tell you, I changed the guardian for my daughter 4 times before she was 18 in my will. Seemed like everyone I named, they'd get divorced, and so I had to pick someone else. So just don't delay. If you don't have a will and you have minors and the money goes to the government, they get it at 18, you might have a competition as to who gets the children. It's critical to put these plans into play. I have to tell you, the guardianship in a will is one of the few things that is not legally enforceable, because the government takes the position, if something comes out after the fact that you didn't know about, they could move your children from whatever guardian you picked to a different one as appropriate. Wills also have to set out powers. If you have a 2-page will, you have a problem, because wills have to include all the different powers to authorize an executor to sell things, hold on to things, invest, borrow. There are extensive powers that an executor needs to finish their job. So it's like you've created a document where there's no engine to the car. So making sure that's in place. If you don't have proper powers, the end result is they have to ask a judge for permission to do something. And I'm back to the same thing at the beginning. You spend a little bit money now to do it properly instead of a lot of money later. Have I reached my point, Darren? I don't know. I forgot to put my timer on. 2 more minutes. Okay. In terms of other little things to think of in a will, we used to in wills say the silverware to Aunt May. And over time, people have discovered that you would change who you'd want to leave things to. So we stopped doing that. We now have a provision in a will that sets out the right for you to have a separate list. So that way, if you decide you want to leave my wedding ring to my daughter and my armoire to my son, you can do that in a separate list, change it whenever you want without paying your lawyer to change the will every time you want to make a change. So that's a useful clause to put in. And lastly, the burial, cremation, funeral instructions. I can tell you often the will is read after the funeral. So don't rely on what you put in the will for those instructions as being followed. If you are very specific as to what you want, tell your executor or pre-plan your funeral with the funeral home. A lot of people don't realize you can pre-plan without prepaying. People are afraid to walk into a funeral home and plan their funeral thinking they're going to have to pay 5 to 10 grand at the time. You can completely pre-plan it without paying. And that means then the executor simply makes a call. So all of the proper planning, like working through the plan well for serious illness, getting your powers of attorney's wills, sorting out what's happening later, and then Anthony next talking about your financial health, all of that is creating a holistic view of making your life all sorted out for the next generation. So if you have questions later, I'm still going to be here.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. There are a few questions in the chat room you can have a look at. We'll bring them back up after Anthony's presentation. Anthony, please.
Thank you, Darren. So, yeah, I uh, I actually have a presentation I'm going to put up. Just a little update on myself. I've been in the industry for around 15, 16 years now, and I have a long description on my LinkedIn account of what I do. But my real goal is to just make sure people don't lose sleep over their finances. And there's been a lot of like no one's expected a pandemic through the world, and no one thought we'd go through this, but it's happened. So I'm just going to put up the presentation here and kind of talk a little bit about it. But I'll start with the story, and just it kind of hit me this weekend, and kind of started thinking about it more. Was we had a bit of a scare, and I'm sure we all have, and I hope no one had. Yes, COVID, but we had a bit of a scare last Friday. We got a notice from our school that there were 3 positive cases in our kids' school, and we didn't know what that meant, but we had to wait until the weekend kind of went by, and then Sunday we got a notification that one of the cases, actually 2 of the cases, were in our son's class, and we didn't know really what to think. Luckily, we ended up getting tested because our son was sick. But again, we still get sick nowadays. Like people have forgotten that. Like just because you have a runny nose doesn't mean it's COVID. It just means the sickness. So we got tested and everything came back negative. But it did really put the thought in my head for me. And being a wealth advisor, if something were to happen to me in a serious illness manner, is my family going to be okay? And that's what I really had to think about. Like, if I died today, is my family going to be able to support the house, the life that they're living right now in my absence? And I know confidently that they would be. But Darren, Carolyn, and I, we get to see people's personal lives very closely, and we hear both ends of people are very covered and people that just weren't prepared enough. So my presentation is going to be more about just some examples and some overview and just some questions you should ask yourself. And again, if after all of this, if you have any other questions, you can reach out. I'll happily have a phone call with anyone if you want to review a financial plan or talk about your finances in general. So like I say to my clients, you plan for your future every day, how you budget, how you save your money. But pandemic happens, or you get hit by a car, or you have a cancer that's deadly, or there's so many different ways. But will your financial plan cover the unknown? Is really, because you can plan for things like this. It's just no one likes having the conversation. So why gamble with your life? Why gamble with your finances when you don't have to? You just have to, like Darren said, have the difficult conversations from time to time with the people you need to. So I have 2 different options purely on the financial aspect that you should look at. So if your serious illness leads to death, and again, is your family going to be burdened or not by this? Obviously, grief, yes, but are they going to still be able to manage to get through everything? And so what will it cost if you die? And it's, do you have a mortgage? Do you have debts? Do you have, will there be taxes owed? How much will the funeral be? Does your income, some people have the higher income of the 2 partners. Will one cover enough? Will you need that person's income for so long? So this is just the general, and some of these are actually averages that people will need. And just as an example, I put $250,000 on the debts part. But so if you have $250,000 for the debt, do you have $25,000 in credit card debt? Do you have taxes owed on your investments when everything gets cashed out? A funeral, though, they are very expensive to hold. And the most part is the income part. If you make $50,000 a year, do you need that person's income for another 10, 20 years? It can add up quite fast. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. Now, the next part is the serious illness is, what if it's a long recovery? There's not necessarily you die, because there's both sides of this, but what if you go through this type of scenario for 6 months, a deadly cancer, you get hit by a car, and it's something that lasts long enough that it's still going to cost you a financial burden for many months, which again, it happens. So things to consider is there's both medical and non-medical expenses that you're going to have to endure. The medical side, as you can see, we all know this. And on the non-medical side, like I said, there is many aspects of when you get seriously ill and you stop working and income stops going into your family. Life doesn't stop just because you have an illness, but you can plan for that. So the things that you really could plan for is your after-tax income. There's out-of-pocket medical expenses, things that you'll have to upgrade in your house if it leads to that aspect. People have to do home modifications. If you're going to have to go through rehab, you have nursing. If you have children and you need them to go somewhere, childcare, someone to take care of your children. I know in this world there's not really childcare in that aspect, but. And what if you need transportation back and forth from the hospital, if you need other ways to cover? So again, just as an example, but roughly it can cost about $72,000 out of your pocket. And that's based on the fact that if you have a $5,000 a month, so about $5,000 a month of after-tax income. It can roughly cost $72,000 if your income stops. And that's, yes, $1,000 on transportation, $1,000 on home health care, $25,000 out of pocket care. So this is stuff that we can plan for in your financial plan, so you don't have to lose sleep if it's not COVID, if it's something else. There's so many stories I can tell about the all of a sudden sicknesses to people that are in great shape. That's the unfortunate part about life sometimes. And really, so now there's a look of the 72,000. Because if you do live, or if your family, or if you die, will the $72,000 really take you off your plan? How is your money invested? How often do you have your money reviewed? Has it been doing okay? Is it too risky? Unfortunately, people got sick last year, and just on the investment side, last year the stock markets were very, very volatile. And if people got sick last March, April, May, a lot of the stock markets were down 40%. What were you invested in? You lost your job, you get COVID, and you start needing your money, and you're taking your money out at a horrible time. Or is your money bucketed in a way that you do have places that you can access and not hinder yourself long-term? So, and the last bit, a little bit, would be about, is your money going to hurt you in taxes? And this is just general knowledge, but there's essentially 4 different ways you can invest your money. You can either have open, non-registered money. Anything that grows in there is capital gains for you. So when you do take your money out, you're going to have to pay more tax to the government. Like Darren had the quote in there, the only 2 certain things in life are death and taxes, and the government's going to get their money. There's no way around them. I haven't found a way around them, and I've tried, but there's no way. Then you have your RSPs and your RIFs, your retirement savings plans. You can have access to this money, but it triggers extra income for you. The tax-free savings account is a great place to have your money nowadays, especially if you're taking advantage of it. You can contribute up to $75,000, $75,500, as long as you were 18 years old in 2009. And then you have your locked-in registered savings plans, which usually come from corporate pensions that you've had. There's minimum access to this. Only way to really get it is through financial hardship. There's limited ages when you can actually get it. It's either 55, 60, 65, that whatever the way they actually lock it in. So again, once the emergency happens, if you take this money out, you got to think about the long term of that effect and how to access your money. So, and I'll just show you one quick example. So like Darren said, there's a serious illness. On the financial side, there's a lot of insurance that you can obtain to protect yourself, and you can protect yourself over the things that cause you death, and there's things that you can protect yourself for critical illness. So, and I showed a little example, and every case is different, but I just showed a 45-year-old male and female non-smokers and what a solution would be to cover those two examples I had. So to be covered for $575,000, it would be about $86 a month. And the critical illness, so if you do have something that you need that $75,000 or the $72,000, is about $73 a month. So if you budget, it's not a large amount of money to something that can be devastating to the family. And this is not everyone's scenario. This is just a general idea to have that conversation with your financial advisor, or if you want to have a conversation later on, there are easy ways to find out what you need to be covered for so you don't lose sleep. So, and the worst case happens, will you sleep all right at night? And I want to say that my clients do. And that's the end of my presentation, if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Anthony. If you
I'm
could
just finding it. There we go.
Yeah, great, excellent. So again, thanks to both Carolyn and Anthony for your excellent presentations. The time is now yours as an audience to post questions to us. Carolyn, there were a few directed in the chat room to you. Have you had a chance to look at that? And you want to start?
Yeah, and I can address those now.
Sure.
So first of all, the government sites do have powers of attorneys and what are called will kits. I am sorry, I have to strongly recommend that you hire an estate planner lawyer. It doesn't have to be me, but hire a lawyer that does estate planning, because if something is missing in that power of attorney, if there should be terminology or a proper backups, it's very useful to be done properly. Also, the will kits, I can tell you, make estate litigators a lot more money than anybody else. So especially wills, do not rely on those kits. It takes very few lawyers do will drafting very well. We have to take courses every year. So to expect a layperson to print off a blank form and fill it in properly, I strongly recommend against that. Absolutely, the prices of wills are going to be all over the map. All I can do is tell you my practice. For an individual, it would be fairly straightforward. So that would mean you would have no offshore bank accounts, disabled beneficiaries, anything very complex. You'd probably be looking at somewhere around 500 for the will and both powers of attorneys total. If it's a couple, again, straightforward, would probably start around 750. So it's not doubled. I'm doing double the work, but I'm only doing it in less time because I'm seeing it together. So that would give you some idea. If you've got more complex issues, large corporate holdings and out of country assets, and we have to do some different things, the cost goes up from there. It would not be extra if I have to do trusts for children. That's a very common thing in almost all of my wills. I have trusts for children or grandchildren, so that is not going to add to the cost of the will. I'm located at the law firm Viner Kennedy, right downtown Kingston, on the corner of Princess and King, above the Royal Bank. And I think that answers the questions on the chat line for me.
Thanks, Carolyn. Anthony, there's a question about insurance with pre-existing conditions. Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, of course. It obviously depends on what the conditions are, but when I'm doing any sort of insurance policies, I am looking at every company that offers insurance, and every single insurance company offers different rules behind what they will and will not allow. And sometimes if it does get approved, the rates are just higher, but it really depends on what you're looking for to be covered for, how much, if it's critical, is it life, is it disability? But it can, but I need to get the full holistic picture to give you a better answer.
Okay, so we'd encourage you to reach out to Anthony. Any other questions? Carolyn, can I just reflect an experience to you and just have you sort of comment on it? Because you're at the front end of preparing people for serious illness and drafting these documents. And I'm at the back end, when serious illness happens. And you talked about naming an individual, and preferably one, so they have that autonomy to sort of, and aren't encumbered by having to talk to other people. Yeah, and in the end, when we're making these life and death decisions, and although there usually is one person named as decision maker, in my observation, it's very much a social process of that person in collaboration with brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and other familiares to make that collaborative decision. And sometimes that goes very well because that person named is that kind of a person, a collaborator, a communicator. Sometimes it doesn't go very well because there's this expectation that, oh, because mom and dad named, this person as the power of attorney, that all that responsibility relies on them, or they grab that power and do what they want to do. And so it just creates dysfunction. So I don't know like really what I'm asking or what I'm looking for.
I do.
Okay, please.
Okay, so in that initial discussion with the client, I actually talk about the family dynamics and talk about, if you're going to pick the one kid who doesn't get along with everyone else and it's always had a power thing in the family, that's maybe not the person to pick. So there is some discussion about that. Same thing with doing an estate plan, choosing executors, divvying things up. If they want to do something unique, like I want the cottage, I want this kid to have the right to buy the cottage, I want this kid to get this. Sometimes it's useful to have even a family meeting where everyone hears straight from the horse's mouth exactly what mom and dad want, and everyone expresses what they don't like now. So we can sort it out and everyone's fine. So maybe, having the family have that discussion. This is what I want if in a serious illness, everybody hear it. Yes, this kid is the one making the decision, but
property and what
I'm not, I want to make sure everyone hears it and knows.
Yeah. It reminds me of my own family reunion and you can imagine I'm promoting this concept of family discussions, and my parents are in their 80s. My mom has dementia. And so my dad was verbalizing his wishes of just, when our number comes up, just let us go. And of course, I'm named as the power of attorney because I'm the medical person in my family. But my sister objects vehemently because she's the youngest. She's got younger children. She wants my parents around for, forever so that her younger children can enjoy them. And if it weren't, so it was super important that we had that conversation in advance in the family reunion where my parents' wishes are heard by all, because you can imagine some conflict we might have had we not made that conversation transparent beforehand with my parents alive. So great.
The other thing I wanted to mention was you have to look at this estate plan as a moving target. I don't think doing this plan well guide today is I think you should look at it again. 5 years, do it again.
Yeah.
So because the way you look at things may change over time, what you've seen in other families, something that's happened in your life. Same thing with doing wills and powers of attorneys. They should be reviewed every 5 to 7 years. What we do in our firm is we have a very regular right for a client to review their documents with me at no charge. I specifically do that because if there's a change in the law, I'm not going to send a note out to my 2,000 will clients. There's a change in the law, you should call me. So this way, if they know that they can call me on a regular basis without worrying about a bill unless we make a change, then usually it's a 2-minute conversation. But it's just, think of this as a moving target. Don't think once I've done this, we're done. You probably aren't. In 5 to 7 years, there may be something tweaked somewhere.
I do have one thing I'd like to add, just in regards to this talk. What I've been using with a lot of my clients recently is actually prepping their executors and actually getting them to understand what's going on, what their powers and what they need to do. And Carolyn has made a point, like that simplicity is best. And I just have this was years ago. I was working at TD Bank, and I had one of my clients pass away, and I had 7 people come into my office. Never met these people, but I had 7 people come in my office, and they said, so-and-so has passed away. And they brought in the documentation, everything they needed, but I ended up finding out that in the will, it stated that all 7 children have to do everything together. The issue is the children live across the country. They had to fly in, and then they ended up going to each bank because they didn't actually have the conversation with their kids about where their assets are. So they had to go and hunt and find things that aren't necessarily in the will. So simplicity tends to be the best way, but again, depending on families, some people just don't like talking about finances with their children, and really you should have more of an open conversation, especially closer to the end or if something does happen. So I usually do this thing called a will companion. It's a document you can fill in that you can utilize with the will, and it's basically just information of where everything is.
Yeah, and Anthony, the point is, most of my clients don't want their kids to know everything until they die. But
That's the thing.
But if you had a summary, like Anthony's mentioning, with your will documents, then they know that they haven't missed a life insurance policy somewhere. And you'll often see in the paper where people advertise for creditors when someone passes away. If you had a really clear list of, these are my debts, these are my assets, we wouldn't even have to advertise for creditors. So there's all kinds of, when you do a full estate plan properly, there's all kinds of ways we can save money everywhere along the way.
Carolyn, there's a question for you in the chat that I'll have you look at while I just make a comment, because someone also asked me, well, how frequently should I update and look at and redo my Plan Well Guide Dear Doctor letter? And whereas Carolyn may have said that, every 5 to 7 years you review your will and estate plan, if you're young and healthy, that might work for you as well to review Plan Well Guide or the Dear Doctor letter every 5 to 7 years. But I think if you're at an older stage in life, or if you've acquired a new medical complication, or if you've been hospitalized recently for a serious illness, you'll want to review your advanced care Dear Doctor letter a little more frequently than that. I also will say that we're always innovating and adding new content and updating our website. And so in the next 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, we'll be launching a new Plan Well Guide. Carolyn made reference to how power of attorneys have also the ability to enact your personal care if you become incapacitated. So my presentation was all about the medical side of care, but we've got a new module on the new Plan Well Guide that will be launched in 4 to 6 weeks that helps you think ahead, plan ahead, record a value. There's a values question there using the same way that will help you make decisions or help you inform your power of attorney regarding matters related to non-medical or personal care. So if you haven't been on Plan Well Guide, you can come now, but I'd also encourage you to really look 4 to 6 weeks from now when we have a new offering that will include this extra module. And there's other visuals and other texts that we're bringing into the new Plan Well Guide that will be launched in the future. So
the 2 other questions on there for me, Darren. You are welcome if you have a specific question to call me, and I'll spend a few minutes with you on the phone for free. If you're looking at talking to me about an estate plan, then we're starting to put the plan together. So if you're asking me how long will the free consult be, you're looking at answering a question. So under 5 minutes. I don't do estate plan consultations for free. If you decide you want to retain me to do a will and powers of attorneys, that whole discussion then would be like what I quoted you. If it was an individual, it would take us to the end of preparing the will and powers of attorneys. I also asked if there's a disagreement, should a family member pass, is the will frozen? There are very limited reasons why people can contest a will. Either you're incompetent, you've been pressured to do something. You can leave all your money where you want it. You don't have to leave money to all of your children. You can cut people out. They don't have an automatic right to contest. And that would be reviewed with your estate planning lawyer as to what's the likelihood of it being contested. So if I had a client, for instance, come into my office and they were 80 and they wanted to cut out one of their children, I would do all kinds of things to protect their intent. So I would want to confirm capacity. I'd want to get a whole explanation as to why we're cutting someone out. It does freeze it for a time if they actually file something in court to freeze it. And then you have to hire an estate litigator to fight that. Or your estate does, sorry. So that's sort of that, but it's unknown how long it could be frozen.
Thanks, Carolyn. I've had a question directed to me personally that I'd like to respond publicly. And the question is about, how to have that difficult conversation with older parents who, may be private or may just, not want to engage with you in the medical part of this conversation that I've been talking about. And that is a reality for many people. It is a difficult conversation. I created a 4-minute video, YouTube video on exactly that point. It's called ACP Conversations video. You'll find it on my website, either the second page in on, about this website or on the resource page. And I would simply, invite you to watch that video with your parents and see what discussion evolves, because there on that video are people like me and other healthcare professionals showing why and telling why it's important that we normalize this conversation about talking about illness, death, and dying. And so hearing it from a third party, and hopefully with some credibility and authenticity, will then help you follow on and say, well, what did you think of this? And how does this relate to our situation, mom and dad, and stuff like that. So watch the video and then let the natural conversation evolve. And I hope that's successful. If that's not successful and you want to chat to me about it, email me and we can we can think of something else. Other questions, please? Okay, well, maybe you're satisfied with the presentations today. I'd like to announce that we will be sending you an email either later today or probably tomorrow with a link to the presentation, the recording, so you'll have that available to you. There'll also be an evaluation, so please take a few minutes just to fill out the evaluation, give us some feedback on how we can make our offering better. And so with that, I'll stop the recording and I'll thank you all for your participation and wish you well and stay healthy and happy. Enjoy the rest of your day.